1943, the air in England was filled with fear and hope. Warplanes flew day and night, and factories worked without sleep. Somewhere near the edge of a Royal Air Force base in Lincolnshire, a mechanic named Thomas "Tommy" Blake stood in a small, oily workshop. He wasn't a scientist. He wasn't even an officer. But he had an idea, one people laughed at. Tommy had spent years fixing Spitfires. He knew their engines, wings, and screws better than anyone. But what always bothered him was the propeller. To him, the classic single-propeller design was not enough. He believed it was holding the Spitfire back. He had read papers, scribbled notes in oil-stained notebooks, and once even built a small model with a strange twin propeller system. Everyone had called it silly. Some even called it dangerous. "You'll tear the whole engine apart with that spinning madness," one senior officer told him. But Tommy was stubborn. He had seen pilots shot down because they couldn't outrun German Messerschmitts. He had seen Spitfires pushed to their limits and still falling short. He believed speed could save lives. Speed was survival. One rainy afternoon, after most of the base had shut down for rest, Tommy walked into the hangar with a wooden prototype. It had two smaller propellers stacked in opposite directions, both set to spin in counter-rotation. He stood there, greasy hands gripping the model, staring at the aircraft in front of him like it was alive. Flight Officer James McCullen spotted him. James was younger than most, but respected. He had flown over France, over the Channel, and had seen what war did to boys in the sky. "What's that mess?" James asked with a half-smile. Tommy didn't smile back. "Something that could make you fly faster than anything in the Luftwaffe." James laughed a little, but he leaned in. "Go on then. Tell me." So Tommy did. He explained how counter-rotating propellers could cancel torque, reduce drag, and push more power from the Merlin engine without overheating it. James didn't understand every word, but he understood one thing. This mechanic believed in it with his whole heart. 2 weeks later, James arranged something that shocked the entire engineering staff: permission for a trial build. One Spitfire, old and nearly retired, was given to Tommy and a small team. They called it the Freak behind his back. The team worked for days, rebalancing the nose, reinforcing the gearbox, checking the rotation control. It wasn't easy. Sometimes bolts didn't fit. Sometimes engines overheated. There were arguments. One man walked off the project. But Tommy didn't stop. He barely slept. Finally, on a cold morning, the twin-prop Spitfire rolled onto the field. It looked odd, even funny. Pilots stood back, arms crossed, unsure whether to laugh or run for cover. But James McCullen stepped forward and climbed into the cockpit. "No one else is crazy enough to try this," he said with a wink. The propellers roared to life. Twin blades spinning in opposite directions cut through the morning mist. It sounded like thunder. Everyone braced themselves. Then the plane rolled forward, lifted, and shot into the sky. At first, nothing happened. Then James turned, dived, and opened the throttle. The twin-prop design kicked in like a beast woken from sleep. The Spitfire screamed past the airfield faster than anyone had seen. The radar officer ran in to confirm the speed. 470 miles per hour, he shouted, almost not believing it himself. No one laughed after that. Tommy stood there, eyes wide, hands trembling. Not from fear, but from knowing at last he had been right. Tommy didn't speak much that day. After the flight, everyone was in shock. Engineers, commanders, and mechanics surrounded the field, pointing and whispering. Some scribbled in notebooks. Others just stared at the sky where the Spitfire had disappeared moments ago. James landed with a wide grin on his face. He stepped down from the cockpit like a man returning from another world. He didn't say much either, just patted the plane's side and said, "This thing isn't a Spitfire anymore. It's something else now." The name stuck. People around the base started calling it the Beast, but success comes with attention. And attention in wartime always brought risk. A week later, a black staff car arrived at the base. Out stepped two men in crisp uniforms. One of them was from the Ministry of Aircraft Production, and the other wore a badge from Supermarine, the original designers of the Spitfire. They didn't ask to see the plane. They asked who gave permission. The base commander, a stern man named Colonel Whitmore, wasn't pleased. He'd allowed the test quietly because he didn't believe it would succeed. Now he had to explain how one mechanic, with no formal engineering degree, had altered one of Britain's most critical aircraft without approval from above. Tommy was called in for questioning. The room was small, cold, and smelled like smoke. The man from Supermarine, Mr. Halford, looked over Tommy's notes without saying a word for several minutes. Then he asked, "Did you steal this design?" Tommy frowned. "No, sir. It's mine." Halford raised an eyebrow. "You're telling me you, a base mechanic, figured out what our entire design team hasn't touched in 5 years? I'm telling you, I've fixed over 100 of your planes. I know where they bleed and I know how to stop it." Silence. The man from the ministry leaned forward. "This design, it worked. We've never clocked a Spitfire over 450. You hit 470. That's beyond anything in our books. But it wasn't tested safely. What if it tore apart in the sky? What if the pilot died?" Tommy looked him in the eye. "What if he died because I didn't try?" They couldn't argue with that, not directly. But they didn't like it. They ordered the prototype grounded. Official testing was to be done through Supermarine channels only. Tommy was told to hand over every note, sketch, and logbook. He was dismissed from the project immediately. Back in the hangar, James found him sitting alone on a tool chest. "They're taking it," Tommy said quietly. "I know," James replied. "They're going to turn it into some government file. They'll shave it clean and smooth and call it their invention. Maybe in 5 years I'll read a line in the newspaper, 'Spitfire upgraded with new propulsion system,' and that'll be it." James didn't argue. It was probably true. But war didn't wait for politics. 2 nights later, a call came from command. A squadron over Belgium had lost 3 planes in one engagement. A new German fighter, faster and deadlier, was being reported. The Allies needed speed now. The beast was ungrounded within 48 hours. Tommy was told nothing. He watched from the shadows as other engineers inspected his plane, following his notes like they were a stranger's blueprints. They didn't ask him anything, and they didn't thank him either. But James, he asked for one thing. He requested to take the beast into battle himself. It was risky. The prototype had only flown once. But command approved it. At dawn, James climbed back into the cockpit. He didn't look nervous. He looked like a man ready to finish what he started. Tommy stood nearby, still in his grease-stained overalls, hidden behind a fuel truck. Before taking off, James looked back once. He gave Tommy a thumbs up. That was all. The beast roared louder than before. The twin props sliced through the morning air like a saw through timber. And then off it went, tearing down the runway, lifting into the sky like a bullet breaking free. Tommy didn't take his eyes off it until it disappeared into the horizon. And in that moment, even though they had taken his name off the papers, even though he would never be allowed near that cockpit again, he knew one thing with certainty. That crazy idea of his. It was flying now. James flew the beast straight into enemy skies with the confidence of a man who trusted the machine beneath him more than the people behind him. The sky over Europe wasn't quiet. It was alive with fire, noise, and death. But the beast wasn't just another plane anymore. It was faster, tighter, meaner. Tommy didn't sleep that night. He sat in the workshop, hands black with oil, just staring at the old model he'd built months ago. The same design that had been laughed at. The same one that might now be the only reason James was coming back alive. Then around noon the next day, the airfield phone rang. Tommy ran to the control tower just in time to hear the radio crackle with James's voice. "This is Eagle 1. Returning with kills. Repeat, returning. 2 enemy fighters down. No damage." The control tower erupted, cheers, fists in the air. One of the younger mechanics even cried. But Tommy didn't cheer. He just stood there, eyes fixed on the sky, waiting to see it with his own eyes. And then there it was, a dark green blur sweeping low over the trees, engine howling like a beast let loose. The twin prop blur cut through the air, then circled once before landing smooth as silk on the grass strip. James climbed out of the cockpit slowly, his eyes tired but burning. "They didn't even see me coming," he said, dropping his helmet. "I was past them before they could blink." The officers were already on their way, high-ranking ones this time. Word had spread. A Spitfire that could outrun a Messerschmitt 262? That was impossible. Until now, the base turned into a different world overnight. More engineers showed up. Crates of tools, measuring equipment, cameras and test rigs were brought in. They set up a perimeter around the beast like it was a holy relic. No one could touch it except the assigned team from Supermarine. Tommy wasn't part of it. He watched them from a distance, the same way a father might watch another man raise his child. They took her apart piece by piece, checking every inch of the design. They praised the modification quietly among themselves, but never once mentioned his name. By the end of the week, the ministry declared the design a classified wartime breakthrough. Mass production was suggested, with the modification to be named the V-twin drive enhancement. It sounded technical, clean, empty. It didn't sound like Tommy. James, however, hadn't forgotten. He stormed into Colonel Whitmore's office and demanded that Tommy be recognized. "Without him," James said, "I'm dead in France. You're all dead in a year." The colonel shook his head. "The ministry's already written the report. Tommy's not a registered engineer. No degree, no credentials. If we give him credit, they'll tear the whole thing down for a technicality." "So what?" James shouted. "You're going to let a man who saved lives be erased?" "Not erased," the colonel said. "Just unmentioned." That night, Tommy sat alone again, but not for long. James walked into the workshop with a bottle of whiskey and 2 tin cups. He placed them on the bench and poured without asking. Tommy didn't look up right away. "They're saying it'll go to full production in 3 months, James said. "Factory boys will copy your work and install it across the fleet. They won't put your name on it, but your fingerprints. They'll be on every single one." Tommy finally looked up. "That doesn't change anything." James leaned forward. "It changes everything. Pilots will live, missions will succeed, and you'll know it. That has to count for something." Tommy took a sip. The drink burned his throat, but it felt right. "Promise me one thing," he said. "What?" "When they write about this one day, when they say how the Spitfire became the fastest bird in the sky, make sure they know someone like me had a part in it. Even if it's just told in bars or over campfires. Promise me that." James held up his cup. "I swear it." Outside, the beast sat in the moonlight, quiet, still, a strange creation born from a stubborn mechanic's mind and a war that had no time for rules. It didn't matter anymore if the papers forgot his name. The sky never would. Weeks passed. The war didn't slow down, but the beast changed the way the RAF flew. After the first combat run, High Command fast-tracked a modified version of Tommy's design. Soon, a small batch of twin-prop Spitfires rolled out of a secret hangar in West Sussex. They were repainted, renumbered, and never acknowledged in public. The pilots called them ghost wings because they appeared fast, struck hard, and vanished before enemy radar could blink. Tommy, meanwhile, had been quietly reassigned. Not promoted, not rewarded, just moved. They sent him to a factory in the Midlands, away from the base, away from the sky. His job now was to inspect propeller installations and ensure maintenance protocols. It was a desk with a view of a metal wall and a boss who thought wrenches were dangerous if held the wrong way. He hated it. Every time a crate was wheeled past him marked VTDE, his design, he felt both pride and sickness. They were building it everywhere now. Dozens of Spitfires with the twin-prop upgrade were entering service, but no one knew who came up with it. The official story credited a collaborative team effort by Supermarine engineers under wartime urgency. Tommy wasn't mentioned, not even once. One day, while walking past the back of the assembly floor, he saw something that made him stop. A group of young engineers were gathered around a test rig. They were arguing over the gear ratios for the dual prop system. Tommy walked over quietly. "You're gonna burn the gearbox if you pair those ratios with the Merlin 61, he said, without looking up. The engineers turned, confused. One of them scoffed. "And who are you?" "Just the idiot who built the thing you're now trying not to break." They didn't believe him at first. So he walked them through it, every turn, every stress point, every vibration calibration. Within minutes, they were taking notes. By the end of the hour, they were asking questions like students to a professor. Word spread. Soon, other engineers came to him, quietly in the corners of the factory floor or during smoke breaks. They wanted to know how it worked, why it worked, how he thought of it. He never bragged. He just explained, gently, honestly, like someone who still couldn't quite believe it had worked either. Then one evening, as he prepared to head home, he found an envelope waiting for him on his small desk. No return name, just his name in pencil. Inside were three things: a blurry photo of the beast in mid-flight, a short note, Northwest Patrol today, 2 kills. We got 'em before they even saw us. J. And at the bottom, scribbled in handwriting he knew well, they don't have to know. I do. Tommy didn't cry. He just folded the note, placed it in his inside pocket and sat down. But that wasn't the last surprise. The next week, he was ordered to report to a special engineering conference in London. He assumed it was a mistake. He packed a bag anyway and took the train, expecting some dull panel of men in suits talking about oil pressure and procurement. Instead, he was taken to a quiet government building near Whitehall. A small room. 3 men in RAF command uniforms. One wore civilian clothes and had the kind of smile that never fully reached the eyes. "We're not here to thank you," the civilian said bluntly. Tommy raised an eyebrow. "Didn't think you were. But we are here to offer something. Quiet recognition. You'll never be in the press, but there's a technical registry off the books. Top secret projects. We'd like to list you as the origin designer for the VTDE Spitfire enhancement. For internal records." Tommy stared at them. "You're offering me a ghost credit," he said. "If that's how you want to see it," the man replied. "We can also arrange for an informal advisory role on upcoming designs. No public title. But access, input, real work. It wasn't glory. It wasn't fame. But it was something." He nodded once. "All right," he said. "But I want one thing." "What's that?" "I want my original model back. The wooden one. You took it from my workshop." "I want it on my bench." The man in civilian clothes smirked. "That can be arranged." Tommy walked out of that building into the cold London air, unsure if he'd just been honored or buried deeper. But one thing was clear now. The beast wasn't just a one-time miracle. It was the beginning of something bigger. Back at the Midlands factory, Tommy found a plain wooden box waiting for him. No markings, no seal, just his name scrawled in the corner in the same neat, stiff handwriting used on military documents. He opened it slowly, expecting disappointment. Instead, there it was, his original model, the one he'd built with scrap wood, spare bolts, and faith. It was scuffed and cracked, but intact. He held it in his hands like it was a piece of himself returned after being lost at sea. He placed it back on his workbench right where it belonged, and something inside him shifted. He wasn't invisible anymore. The weeks that followed moved fast. He wasn't a ghost in the factory anymore. Engineers came to him for advice. Junior officers asked his opinion before installing modifications. Even the managers, once cold and dismissive, gave him polite nods and stayed out of his way. And yet he was still never officially named. No ceremonies, no medals. His recognition lived in quiet corners and whispered thanks. In the way his design was now being installed in more than just Spitfires. Hawker Tempests. Even some American P-51 Mustangs coming in under Lend-Lease were being examined for potential dual-prop compatibility. One afternoon, a young American pilot named Fletcher walked into the shop. "You the bloke who made the Spitfire go like a bat out of hell?" he asked, chewing gum and leaning against the doorway. Tommy raised a brow. "Depends. Are you the bloke who chews with his mouth open in front of strangers?" Fletcher grinned. "Fair enough. Look, they're fitting one of your twin prop deals on a Mustang. They say it can punch through cloud faster than a bullet. Is it true?" Tommy wiped his hands and nodded toward the test rig. Only one way to find out. Fletcher spent the next 3 days glued to Tommy's side, listening, asking, even sketching notes. He was sharp, eager, reminded Tommy of himself before the war turned him into something quieter. "You ever think about what happens when this war ends?" Fletcher asked one evening as they locked up. Tommy shrugged. "I fix tractors. Maybe build some lawnmower that goes 200 miles an hour?" Fletcher laughed. "You should come to the States when this is over. Guys like you. We're gonna need you. Planes aren't going away after this." Fast ones. Faster than anything now. Rockets maybe. Tommy gave a small smile. Let's win the damn war first. But as the war dragged on, tragedy followed. James McCullen didn't come back from his 7th mission with the Beast. Tommy found out through a slip of paper left on his workbench. No explanation. No wreckage. Just a report. Pilot F.O. James McCullen. Status missing in action. He stared at the paper for hours. James had always said the Beast would outlive both of them. But now it was just a story whispered in back rooms and blacklisted reports. Later that week, Tommy walked out behind the hangar where they stored broken gear and sat on an empty fuel drum, staring at the sky. A junior tech came out and offered him a cigarette. Heard McCullen went down, the boy said, eyes low. Tommy didn't answer. They say he took 3 German fighters with him. Was over some rail line in France. No one's confirmed it. But they say the Germans were shocked, said it wasn't flying, it was screaming. Tommy chuckled softly. That sounds like him. The tech hesitated, then said, Sir, you should know. They've grounded the original Beast permanently. They're locking it in a crate, calling it a prototype relic. Orders came this morning. Tommy nodded slowly. That night, under the cover of rain, he went back to the hangar. The Beast stood alone, wheels chained, body bruised from war, paint faded from time. But it still looked alive. Still dangerous. Still hungry. He walked around it one last time, fingers brushing the edge of the twin props, which were now locked in place like a beast forced into silence. Thank you, he whispered. The next morning he returned to work as usual. No complaints, no questions. But from that day on, his name started showing up in quiet places, on memos, technical briefs, and classified blueprints. Not for public eyes. Not yet, but there. People began calling the design the Blake Drive. Unofficially, of course. He never asked for it. But finally, someone said it out loud. And it stuck. The war neared its end, but Tommy Blake's mind didn't slow down. Even with the factory shifting focus to post-war aircraft, and with fewer orders coming in, Tommy kept arriving early and leaving late. The Beast was locked in a crate somewhere in a restricted hangar, but in his head it still flew every night, louder, faster, stronger. He started sketching new designs in the quiet hours, not just propellers but airframes, wings shaped like blades, engines paired with rocket boosters. Every crazy thought that had once lived in the corners of his notebook now filled entire pages. He even mocked up a design for a hybrid craft, a fighter that could launch like a plane and climb like a rocket. One evening, while he was scribbling over blueprints with oil-stained fingers, a familiar voice called from the doorway. "You haven't slowed down a bit, have you?" Tommy looked up. It was Fletcher, the American pilot, but something was different now. His uniform was cleaner, sharper. He wore a badge on his shoulder that Tommy didn't recognize. "What are you now?" "General of Chewing Gum," Tommy said with a smirk. Fletcher laughed and walked in. "Close. I'm working with the U.S. Army Air Force's Experimental Division. We're scouting talent for the post-war program. Engineers, designers, real ones. Not the ones with titles. The ones with ideas." Tommy raised a brow. "And you came to a worn-out British mechanic for what? Spare bolts?" Fletcher leaned against the workbench. "No. I came to offer you a ticket out of this grey little box." He pulled out a sealed envelope and dropped it in front of Tommy. Inside was a formal invitation. A research post in California. Access to a full testing facility, funding, secrecy, and freedom. Tommy stared at it for a long time. "You're serious?" Fletcher nodded. "Look, the world's changing. We've seen what fast looks like now. But that's nothing compared to what's coming. Jets, supersonic, maybe even space someday. You don't belong in a dusty hangar measuring blade angles. You belong designing the future." Tommy said nothing. His fingers tapped the envelope. Part of him felt a pull stronger than gravity. But there was still something unfinished here. "I'll think about it," he said finally. Fletcher grinned. "Don't think too long. The Yanks don't wait around." After he left, Tommy sat alone with the envelope. He didn't open it, not yet. That night, he returned home to the small cottage he barely used except to sleep. There was a letter waiting for him in the post. It was from James McCullen's sister. Inside, folded neatly, was a photo of James standing next to the Beast, smiling, alive, unshakable. The note was short. He said if anything ever happened, I should send this to the man who gave him wings. He believed in that machine more than anything. He believed in you even more. Tommy held the photo in his hands for a long time. He made his decision the next morning. He returned to the base, cleared his locker, handed in his uniform badge, and gave one final nod to the workshop where it had all begun. Then, without saying a word to the managers, he walked out. 1 week later, he was on a boat to America. The next chapter of his life began in a dusty airfield just outside of Muroc, California, soon to be renamed Edwards Air Force Base. There, among engineers and daredevil test pilots, Tommy Blake began building again. But this time there were no closed doors, no stolen blueprints, no silence. His ideas were welcomed, his past respected. His twin-prop system became the foundation for early jet-assisted takeoffs. The Americans were fascinated by his instinctive understanding of torque, lift, and speed. He never used a slide rule, but he knew what would fly and what would fail. And every time a new plane screamed into the sky, faster than anything before, they'd turn to him and say, "That's another one for Blake." Still, every year on the same day, he would pull out the old photo of James and the Beast and place it on his desk beside that wooden model, a reminder of what started it all. He never forgot the war. He never chased fame. But by the time the world entered the jet age, everyone in the right rooms knew the name Thomas Blake, not as a mechanic, not even just as an engineer, but as the man who turned a crazy idea into a machine that roared louder than war itself. The California sun was nothing like England's grey skies. The air was dry, the wind warm, and the runways stretched for miles into the desert like unfinished thoughts. But for Tommy Blake, this strange new place felt more like home than anywhere he'd ever been. At Edwards Air Force Base, everything moved faster. Planes, ideas, people. Men wore leather jackets instead of uniforms, and engineers carried dreams instead of titles. They didn't care where you were from. They only cared about what you could build. And Tommy, he built like a man on fire. By late 1946, he had his hands on the early jet prototypes, those stubby, dangerous metal birds with names like XP-80 and Bell X-1. American engineers were good, brilliant even. But most of them came from school. Tommy came from the war. He didn't just understand machines, he felt them. One of the head project leaders, Dr. Wallace Green, took an interest in him. "You're different," he told Tommy one evening, after a successful static test. "You don't think in numbers, but you always land in the right place." Tommy smirked. "That's because I never start with numbers. I start with the question, what if it crashes? Then I build backwards." Dr. Green laughed and clapped him on the shoulder. "That's either genius or madness," Tommy shrugged. "Worked so far." As the projects grew more daring, Tommy found himself pulled into something bigger, a top-secret program focused on breaking the sound barrier. No one had done it yet. Some believed it couldn't be done, that planes would shake apart mid-air, that no machine, no man could survive it. But Tommy disagreed. He looked at the latest design for the Bell X-1, the sleek orange rocket plane shaped like a bullet, and said, "It's too stiff, too scared." The other engineers blinked. "Scared?" Tommy tapped the nose of the scale model. "Planes need to flex, breathe. You try to hold the sky too tightly, it breaks you." His idea wasn't ignored this time. Modifications were made. And when Chuck Yeager finally took the X-1 past Mach 1 in October 1947, Tommy stood among the silent crew watching the sky. He wasn't in the photos. He wasn't named in the press. But the chief flight mechanic looked over at him after the sonic boom split the air and said, "Well, Blake, looks like you made another beast roar." Tommy just smiled. But as much as he thrived in America, the past never stopped whispering. One rainy night in early '48, he received a letter from England. It was brief. No return address. Inside, one line: "The beast has been decommissioned, stripped, burned, gone." His hands trembled. They hadn't even saved it. After all that, no preservation, no museum, no honor. Just another piece of metal recycled for the next war. It hurt more than he expected. Later that week, he went into the design lab and locked the door. For 3 days he didn't come out. When he finally did, he carried blueprints in both arms, sheets of paper marked with thick red ink, wild curves, dual engines, and something entirely new. "Gentlemen," he said to Dr. Green and the others, "it's time we build the next beast." They stared at the plans. "What is this?" one asked. Tommy grinned. "A jet that flies before it leaves the ground." He called it the Phantom Spine, a jet with twin rear engines and an aggressive, forward-leaning airframe designed for raw thrust and high-altitude pressure. It looked insane, and for many it was. But Dr. Green signed off on initial testing. By 1951, the Phantom Spine was flying low tests under a shadow program run by the Air Force. It never made the news. It wasn't designed for war. It was a concept plane, an experiment in force, silence, and control. The first time it flew, Tommy stood by the runway like he had years ago back in Lincolnshire, watching something everyone called stupid become impossible to ignore. And once again, it flew, faster than anything he'd worked on, louder than the Beast, smoother than the X-1, a symphony of steel and fire. As the test plane disappeared into the clouds, one of the new pilots, barely 20, turned to Tommy and asked, "How do you keep doing it? Making these things fly like they're alive?" Tommy didn't blink. "Because every plane has a soul, and someone has to teach it how to scream." He never stopped. Not until the day the doctors told him his heart had been working too hard for too long. Even then, his only response was, "Guess I flew it like I stole it." Tommy Blake knew he didn't have much time left. By 1955, the doctors had been clear. His heart was giving out. Decades of stress, fumes, sleepless nights, and engines screaming in his ears had worn it thin. But even then, lying in a quiet hospital bed with wires stuck to his chest and machines clicking beside him, he didn't care much for dying. He cared about flying. On his nightstand sat the old wooden model of the Beast. He'd brought it everywhere since the war, across oceans, through hangars, to secret bases and desert airfields. It was chipped and faded, the propellers barely hanging on, but to Tommy it was still alive. Just like the machines he had poured his soul into. Visitors came and went. Fletcher stopped by one morning, now wearing a clean suit and government badge. He was older, hair graying, but still had that American spark in his smile. "They finally want to put your name on something official," he said, dropping a sealed file on the side table. "The Phantom Spine project's been declassified. They're planning to roll the tech into a new interceptor program. They want to call it the Blake Vector." Tommy raised an eyebrow. "Bit dramatic, don't you think?" Fletcher smirked. "Well, it's either that or Project Angry Grandpa." Tommy chuckled weakly, the sound caught between pain and pride. "Do what you want. Just don't let them bolt it down too tight." Fletcher's smile faded into something softer. "You should know. Some folks back in England, they haven't forgotten. A few pilots got together, started telling stories about the crazy mechanic who made the Spitfire faster than hell. Even tracked down James McCullen's last report before he disappeared. Turns out he wasn't shot down. He sacrificed himself, dived into a German convoy after engine trouble, took out an entire column." Tommy's eyes glistened, but he said nothing, just reached into a drawer and pulled out that same photo, James and the Beast, standing proud on the runway. He held it for a while, then handed it to Fletcher. "Frame that. Hang it somewhere someone will see." Fletcher nodded. Later that evening, when the hospital halls went quiet, Tommy found himself alone again. He stared out the window, where the stars blinked faintly in the night sky. He imagined flying again, not in a cockpit, not with noise and wires, but as light cutting through the clouds, untethered by machines. Then a knock. A nurse walked in, followed by a boy, maybe 15, nervous, thin, clutching a small notebook. "Sorry to bother you, Mr. Blake," the nurse said gently. "This young man heard about your story. He's building model planes. Says you're the reason." The boy stepped forward, eyes wide. "Is it true? You made the Spitfire faster than the Germans?" Tommy looked him over, then smiled. "It's true I made her angry enough to bite." The boy grinned, then held out his notebook. Inside were sketches, tiny blueprints of twin-prop planes, some that looked eerily like his first designs. The drawings were rough, but full of heart. "You want to fly?" Tommy asked. The boy nodded. "Then build something the sky ain't ready for," Tommy said. "Let people laugh. Let them say it's stupid. That's how you know it's worth doing." The boy stood a little taller, nodded, and left with stars in his eyes. That night, as the wind whispered through the open window and the machines beside him beeped slower, Tommy leaned back. He saw flashes. James, climbing into the beast for the first time. The moment those twin props screamed into life. The sonic boom over the desert. The first time someone said, "You made that." He smiled, not for fame, not for medals, but because he knew something most never would. He had changed the sky. The next morning, the nurses found him still, the wooden model resting in his hands. No pain, no alarm, just silence. They said the man who taught machines how to scream had gone out without a sound. But across the world, in quiet corners of runways and workshops, his legacy lived on, in the roar of engines, in the lift of wings, and in every bold idea someone dared to build. Because Thomas Blake didn't just create faster planes. He created possibility, and possibility never dies.